Students with hearing impairments fall into two categories, hard of hearing and deaf. Students with mild to moderate hearing loss are considered hard of hearing, and students with profound hearing loss are considered deaf. According to Bryant, and Smith, 0.6% of U.S. students have hearing impairments. But this number is understated because there is a 25% coincidence rate with another disability, and because not all students with hearing impairments qualify for special education services. Of the 5 essential things teachers should know about students with hearing impairments, number 1 is that there are 3 types of hearing loss: conductive, sensory neural, and mixed hearing loss. Conductive hearing loss comes from a blockage or damage to the outer or middle ear that prevents sound waves from traveling. This often results in a mild or moderate hearing loss. These blockages often occur from a buildup of earwax, fluid, or a punctured eardrum, and can sometimes be reversed through treatment or surgery. The second type of hearing loss is sensory neural. This type of hearing loss is referred to as nerve deafness and results from damage to the inner ear or auditory nerve. This loss is usually permanent and more difficult to treat with technology, although cochlear implants may be an option. Cochlear implants, however, remain controversial in the deaf community though, because these members consider deafness to be a hearing difference instead of a hearing disability. These members may resist inclusion in general education classrooms because they do not believe that deaf children should have to adapt to a hearing world. Number 2, the age at which children lose their hearing is important. The students in our classrooms may be postlingually deaf or prelingually deaf. Students who are postlingually deaf may be able to use speech to communicate with others as they became deaf after learning how to speak and understand English. Students who are prelingually deaf became deaf before they learned to speak. Either they were born deaf or became deaf in infancy or toddler years. These students are seriously affected by their disability in school and must learn different ways to communicate, such as a combination of sign language and oral language. There is an approach called the bilingual, bicultural approach, in which students learn American Sign Language, or ASL, to communicate with others, and they learn English as their second language so that they can read and write. Number 3, visual aids need to be emphasized and utilized in the classroom. If the students are hard of hearing, meaning they have mild to moderate hearing loss, they will rely on visual cues and lip reading to supplement their hearing. Videos should have subtitles. Slideshows should be presented in well-lit rooms. Copies of notes and slideshows should be handed out ahead of time, and male teachers should keep their faces cleanly shaven so that their lips are not obscured. When introducing new vocabulary, the words and their definitions should be written on the board because it is almost impossible to lip read words you have never encountered before.
Number 4, students with profound hearing loss which cannot be remediated by surgery are considered deaf and require an interpreter. In these cases, the teacher must build a working relationship with the interpreter so that the needs of the deaf student are met. For example, the teacher should begin the class speaking at a regular pace, but should be looking for signals from the interpreter that the speed of lecture has gotten too fast. It is natural to talk quickly if there is a lot of material to be covered. Therefore, teachers should look for alternative ways to present material, such as with reading, activities, and homework. Also, when the teacher asks questions to the class, they must allow a delay for the interpreter to sign the question to the student and receive an answer before asking the class to corally respond. The interpreter is quite literally translating English to a foreign language and then receiving the student's response in ASL and translating it back. This process can take a few seconds, even for skilled interpreters. Similarly, if a teacher is pointing to an image on the board or in a slideshow, he or she needs to continue pointing to the image until the deaf student sees it, because the deaf student's attention will be divided between the lesson and the interpreter's signs. Therefore, teachers must pause after referencing images so that the student knows to look away from the interpreter and move his or her attention to the images. Number 5, assistive technology is crucial for students with hearing impairments. Students and teachers need to learn how to use the technology so that the class's content can be accessible to the hard of hearing or deaf student. If the student with hearing impairments does use a hearing aid or cochlear implant, it is important to know to what extent does the hearing aid or cochlear implant improve the student's hearing? Will the student need an interpreter or rely heavily on lip reading? If students do rely on an interpreter, are lessons presented slowly and clearly so that students can take notes from the interpreter's signs without missing any information? Does the interpreter receive a lesson plan before class so that he or she can anticipate the signs needed? Teachers need to ask the question, is the material presented in a manner that is accessible to my students with hearing impairments? Do the videos have closed captioning? Do slideshows have a corresponding note sheet? How can group discussions be modified to encourage participation by all students? These classroom checks need to be performed to make sure assistive tech is being used to make education accessible to hard of hearing and deaf students. The teacher cannot just tell material. He or she needs to show material or do material. Teachers need to incorporate processing time into their lessons so that these students receive an opportunity to see visuals and answer questions. Also, assistive technology can make all the difference in creating a more accessible curriculum. Lastly, one of the most important things to remember about students with any kind of hearing loss is that every situation is different. Teachers must talk to the student, past teachers, parents, or any other individual that can give insight into the student's situation. The teacher must also understand the individual situation and what the student is going through. Students with hearing loss or impairment never get a break. The sound of music, hum of computers, or air conditioners can all be exhausting. These students should be included in the inclusive classroom, and as long as accommodations and modifications are made for the student's disability, these students can succeed.